Hi everybody, this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using the My Creative Scrapbook limited edition kit for March. I started off this layout with one of the cut files that's available to My Creative Scrapbook subscribers. This one says, "Love Every Moment." I prepared the cut file by cutting it out twice, once with the inner cuts and once without. I backed the cut file with some of the papers from this month's kit, and then I glued the second cut file behind the one that was backed, and then I punched some holes and I did some stitching using some white embroidery thread along the inside of all of the letters of the word every. The words love and moment looked kind of plain, so I decided to add some modeling paste. I used a stencil that was in my stash. This is a Tim Holtz stencil, and I applied some modeling paste to those two words. First, I put some washi tape down to protect the word every, so I didn't get any modeling paste on that, especially on the stitching. If you're interested in seeing more about how I backed the cut file, I made a video last month in which I showed the majority of that process. I'll link that video in the description box. I don't usually include that because it's very time consuming and it's rather repetitive, but I did want to have one video where I showed how to do it just in case you were new to backing cut files. And I know how I learn, I really have to see everything, so that video is available. I like to add modeling paste to the words on cut files that aren't backed with pattern paper, mainly because I don't like to have large areas of cardstock that are flat and don't have anything added to them. And the modeling paste just gives a little bit more texture without adding a different color. Sometimes I will just take another cutout of the words and I'll give them texture using an embossing folder. That's another option. I'm using my palette knife here to scrape along the edges of the words just so that the modeling paste is smoothed out along the edges. The light blue mat that I'm working on right now, that is the protective sheet from a Silhouette Cameo mat. I had an old mat that wasn't sticky anymore, so I threw it away, but I always save these blue sheets. They're great to protect the surface you're working on, and I find I can even run them underwater and clean them off. So if you happen to have a Silhouette Cameo and you have an old mat that you're going to throw away, I recommend that you save this sheet. It's fantastic for mixed media. I used a piece of green cardstock from my stash, and I used the offset feature on the Silhouette Cameo, and I made a mat that's just slightly larger than the cut file. And I like to do this when I know the background I'm going to put the cut file on isn't a color that contrasts with the cut file. This way the title will be very noticeable. So I used some gel glue, I attached the offset down to the cut file, and now I'm going to start working on the background. I used that same piece of green paper that I used for the offset to cut a border for around the outside of the entire layout. I just thought that it would be nice to have the green in more than one area of the layout. And then I trimmed a piece of pattern paper from the collection down. I first mounted on some white cardstock and then I attached it down to the green border. Whenever I'm gutting a piece of paper like this, I really like to attach it down to a 12 by 12 inch piece of paper. I find that those gutted borders are sometimes a little bit hard to work with, and I find it easier to work with them when they're attached down to another piece of paper. So whenever I find 12 by 12 inch pieces of paper that I feel I'm not going to use, instead of getting rid of them, I put them to the side and I use them for purposes like these. This is the photo I'm going to use. It's a picture of my daughter Julia with an alpaca from an alpaca farm that we visited when we were in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. We really enjoyed this visit. They had, I think, approximately 100 alpacas, and the farm did not smell at all. It was super, super clean. I don't know how they did it. And the people who owned the farm seemed to really care about the alpacas. It seemed that way to me anyway. They had really old alpacas there as well as really young alpacas, and it seemed like they took really good care of them, which is really important to us. I was thinking that it would make sense to mount the photo on some green cardstock. It already has a white border around it, and I didn't have quite enough paper to do that. Well, not a full connected piece, so I decided to kind of piece the mat together. It turned out to not matter at all because the part of the mat that I pieced together isn't visible. Now that all the major elements of the layout are in place, I am adding some embellishments. I fussy cut this large sunflower from one of the pattern papers, and I thought that it fit nicely to the left of the photo. I used some distress ink and I inked the edges of all of the embellishments that I'm going to place on the layout with the vintage photo. It just helps it to contrast with that light background and it makes them a little bit more noticeable. I added the large sunflower behind the word love. And then I wanted to have another sunflower on the page to kind of balance that sunflower out. So I put a smaller one toward the bottom of the layout on the right-hand side. I fussy cut these leaves out from one of the pattern papers. So I placed those to the right of the flower. And then I added a little bow on the letter T. And then I added some more fussy cut flowers to the right of the leaves, right next to the photo. I love adding butterflies, and there were lots of yellow butterflies to use on my layout, so I decided I was going to put the biggest one toward the top, and then I was going to have some smaller butterflies cascading down the page. I add a couple more butterflies a little bit later on in the process. I added a leaf by the sunflower on the bottom, and then I put a watering can to the left of the word moment. I just love that watering can, and I think that was a perfect spot that needed a little something. And then I add some foam to the back of the butterfly wings. And then I add some adhesive down the center, and I put some on the foam as well. And then when you press that on the center, it makes the leaves lift up a little bit. And I always love to use that effect on my butterflies. So I have the 3 butterflies popped up on some foam and attached down to the page. I also wanted to pop up that watering can because the cut file is a little bit dimensional because of the stitching on the back of it. So I wanted to give the watering can a little bit more height since it overlaps with the cut file. I decided to add another leaf on the sunflower on the bottom of the page. So I put some adhesive on that and then tucked it on top of the first leaf. And now I'm adding in some of these red dimensional flowers. I absolutely love this edition. I think that red really brought the whole layout to life, and I love the way the flowers just seem to fit right on the layout. I think that it's great when things come together that easily. I used some of the vintage photo distress ink, and I inked the edges just a little bit. That just made them look a little bit more rustic, and then it helped to tie the whole layout together. One of my favorite embellishments to add to layouts is photo corners. I use an EK Success scalloped photo corner punch. You can see it to the right of my mat. And since only 2 corners of the photo were showing, I only had to punch out 2. I inked both of them with distress ink, and then I placed them on the 2 corners that are showing. I use my ruler to make sure that that flower cluster at the bottom of the layout is centered. Then I attach down all of the red flowers using some heavy-duty matte gel medium. I think that this is a great adhesive for bulkier items that you want to attach down to your scrapbooking layouts. Once it dries, it's very strong, so I try to be careful to have everything positioned correctly before the adhesive is allowed to dry. I never attached the watering can back to the layout, so I added some adhesive and attached that down. And now I'm adding a few more butterflies. I inked the edges first. My idea was to have them cascading down the page and going slightly to the right. So I inked the edges, popped up their wings on some foam, and then I placed those last 2 butterflies on the layout. I repositioned both of them a little bit, and then I started thinking that it was time to add one of my favorite embellishments, which is pearls. I don't add a ton of pearls to this layout. I add pearls to the 2 photo corners, and then I also add some pearls to the centers of the butterflies. For the photo corners, I use some individual pearls, and for the centers of the butterflies, I use some 3mm self-adhesive pearls, and I get these from the Brad and Eyelet Outlet. Mainly when I go to scrapbooking shows, these come in strips. I find these come in really handy, and then you don't have to work so hard to line up a whole bunch of very small pearls. Most of the embellishments on this page are on the larger side, so I like the idea of adding some embellishments that are a little bit more delicate, and I think that the pearls help to add that smaller element. I added a tab right on top of the photo. I'm going to stamp the date there. And now I'm adding some die cut branches and I'm tucking them into all of the floral clusters. I think that these branches also add a smaller scale element to the page, and then I like the idea of adding some white into all of those very colorful clusters. Once I have all of the branches in place, I use some gel glue and I put a little bit of glue on the base of each of the branches, and then I tuck it underneath the florals. Instead of using white cardstock like I often do, I decided to use one of the very light color pattern papers to die cut out these branches, and I really like that because when you look at the little branches, they have some variations and some touches of color on them. Now I'm adding some finishing touches. I add a small pearl to the center of that yellow bow, and then I use my date stamp and some distress ink, and I stamp the date on the tab at the top of the page. To add a little bit of detail and finish off some of the flower clusters, I used some small stems that had flowers on them that were in that same pack of red flowers. I tucked 2 into the cluster on the left and 1 into the cluster on the right, and I'm using the gel medium to attach them down to the page. Those tiny red flowers were the last touch on the layout, and the layout is complete. Here are some close-ups. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day. I know that time is a scarce resource, and I'm really glad that you chose to spend a few minutes of your day with me. I hope that you enjoyed watching this video. If you take a look in the description box, you'll find the link to the My Creative Scrapbook website where you can view all of the current kits and purchase a subscription. I also recommend checking out the Instagram page where you'll get lots and lots of inspiration. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I will see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.